But let's continue then with the focus on the United States. The latest election polling in the U.S. points to a tight race until the finish for both Vice President Kamala Harris and Republican former President Donald Trump. The 78-year-old Republican is running for the third time in a row after losing to President Joe Biden after a single term in office, while Harris at 60 could make history as the first woman to win the White House, a country with almost 250-year history. Now, this election arrives at a particularly tense moment for a country that saw violence in the aftermath of its last presidential election 4 years ago. For more, let's now speak to U.S. Correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease, who joins us now live from New York. Sherwin, a very good afternoon to you. So having just spoken there to Kate Fisher from Washington, D.C., so what does, the tea leaves show us at this late hour, given that the polling has consistently shown us a tight race right up until the end? What's your reading of this moment on the ground?
So our reading is that the sentiment has shifted a little bit here. We are seeing a more confident posture from the Harris campaign, and we are seeing a more uncomfortable posture, if one can call it that, from the Trump campaign. What does that tell us? Nothing really in particular, based on what the polling tells us, right? That this is a close race right until the finish, both in the national polling and in the key swing states. Maybe Kamala Harris has a little bit of an edge in terms of that polling in a number of key swing states. It shows us that Donald Trump maybe has an advantage in places like Pennsylvania and maybe in places like Arizona. But one key poll that came out over the weekend was from the Des Moines Register in the state of Iowa. Iowa, not a swing state in the vein that we've been talking about the other 7 swing states. And this is a gold standard poll, highly respected. And what this poll showed us was that Kamala Harris had taken the lead in the state of Iowa, which is a Republican-leaning state, by a margin of 3 points, 47% to Donald Trump's 44%. And the data within that polling analysis shows a late swing and a late surge from women in particular. And one wonders, right, whether this poll in Iowa can be indicative of women turning out in these key battleground states, the North Carolinas, the Georgias, the Pennsylvanias, Wisconsins, and Michigans, and are breaking late here for Kamala Harris, right? We've been talking a lot about these swing voters, these middle-of-the-road voters that haven't made up their mind. Those minds have now been made up. We've seen over 75 million votes cast in early voting, and the data is showing us that women are dominating in the early voting by a margin of about 54% to 44%. And the sentiment certainly from the Harris campaign, talking about how they have momentum here in the last stages of this race, is probably indicative certainly of a greater confidence that they are feeling. But also last week, Unati, we talked about the betting markets, and the betting markets had Donald Trump last week estimated to win. The probability was around 67%. The probability today is 50-50. Donald Trump's probability of winning has free-fallen down to essentially a tie between Kamala Harris. And so one does feel that the Harris campaign has momentum here in the late stages.
And given just how tight this race appears to be, Sherwin, when can we expect a final result in this election? And are some concerns around ballot counting that might emerge on election night, perhaps?
Well, what's our latest guidance, right? What happened in 2020? We went a few days. The election was on a Tuesday. Joe Biden was announced the winner after Pennsylvania's results came in only on Saturday. The thing with the United States election system is that we do not have a centralized independent electoral commission or system akin to what we have in South Africa. Here, all 50 states have different rules governing how each state manages their election. And so, some could have electronic balloting. You can have machines tabulating the results, or some will have hand counting. And so the processes will dictate the length of time one has to wait for a result here. What also happens is various counties in different states release results as they come in. And so one can see the tabulation moving up for one candidate, moving up maybe slower for another candidate. Rural areas tend to come in first in some of these states because they're much smaller than the metropolitan cities in the various states. And metropolitan cities tend to favor Democrats, and Republican rural areas tend to favor Republicans. And so when you have early voting coming in from those states, it tends to show Republicans in the lead. And then a big city like Philadelphia, for example, in the swing state of Pennsylvania will come in, and suddenly, Democrats have either caught up or taken a lead. And so what they call this is the mirage effect, the idea that one party is probably doing well, and then suddenly you get a big dump of votes coming in that have been tabulated that gives the other guy or the other gal a lead here. And so there's this mirage effect that one has to be very cautious of. And what did we see in the last election? Donald Trump came out and said he'd won the election before the final results were in. And so there's a great deal of concern about Donald Trump coming out and claiming victory when the final results are not in, as he did in 2020, and what effect that might have on his supporters, right? We have January 6th as a very key example in 2021 where we saw violence in the election, and there's a great deal of concern that might happen again.
I mean, staying on, Donald Trump, we haven't spoken much about this, but this election is particularly personal for someone like Trump, who faces legal jeopardy were he to lose this election. Remind us why that is again.
Donald Trump announced his candidacy 2 years before the election, and the concern then, and the sort of speculation then, when no candidate ever announces they're far in advance before an election, was that he was doing so because he was concerned about the legal peril that he faced. And what we know now is that Donald Trump has not only been convicted of 34 counts of fraud as it relates to hush money payments in the 2016 election to the porn star Stormy Daniels, 34 convictions in terms of fraud in New York's state, which he has yet to be sentenced for, right? The sentencing has been delayed to see this election through. He also faces legal jeopardy in terms of election interference and subversion in a federal indictment that is sitting in Washington, D.C. He faces legal peril in the state of Georgia that is pursuing him on state election interference and racketeering charges. There is also a classified documents case which a judge has thrown out, but it is being appealed by the special counsel. So were Donald Trump to lose this election, he will have to be citizen Donald Trump facing the allegations of criminality in those various court cases. If he wins the election, Justice Department rules say a sitting president cannot be criminally charged and have to spend his time in court. So winning this election would, in a sense, not exonerate, but certainly allow Donald Trump not to face the court processes that are underway here, and were he to lose, he will just be citizen Donald Trump that will have to have his day in court.
Sherwin, let's leave it there for now, but I am very convinced that we will be seeing you minute by minute, hour by hour, blow by blow as we cover these elections. Thank you so much for that. Of course, Sherwin Bryce-Pease coming to us live there from New York, and earlier on we had Kate Fisher who was coming to us live there from Washington. Just a reminder, of course, that the SABC channel will be bringing you wall-to-wall coverage of the US elections tomorrow evening and over the next few days. Stay tuned to that, of course, as we continue then to just cover the elections. We'll also be answering some crucial questions as we go along. When are the results likely to be announced? When is the presidential inauguration? I was also answering questions like, what are the actual swing states and what is the Electoral College? All of that will be unpacked during this blow-by-blow coverage that we will have for you during this time.